Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Helen Brind, and welcome to our webinar and with the snappy title, Understanding the UK Global Tariff and Trading Preference. As I say, my name's Helen Brind, and I am the Growth Hub Manager for Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. This is the sixth in the series of 11 EU exit webinars in partnership with Semlet, Growth Hub, New Anglia, Bucks Business First, Cambridge and Peterborough, Combined Authority and ourselves, which is aimed at helping businesses for international trading post-EU transition period. So I'd like to welcome Andrea Collins from the Export Department. Andrea is an international trade specialist with 24 years experience in the industry, and she specialises in importing, exporting, Brexit readiness, preparedness, business resilience and business growth. She is a business development specialist, having worked in the chemicals, IT and professional services sector. She's a passionate ambassador of UK micro business SMEs, and she launched the Export Department to assist these companies to expand their horizons internationally and raise the profile of UK goods and services abroad. Andrea delivers one-to-one support for a number of growth hubs, including working for me at Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, and she's responsible for the design and delivery of a range of EU exit, international expansion and business resilience support programmes across Lincolnshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire and Oxfordshire. So today, Andrea is going to look at the UK global tariffs and what it does and what it does not cover, and how it's likely to impact on your business, so that you can take steps to prepare and avoid costly mistakes and delays post-transition. Can I ask that all questions, that you put those in the chat, and you can interact with Andrea asking her those questions. We'll make sure we pick up on those questions as we're going through. So you've got two of us on this call today, you've got Sam and myself, so we'll make sure we keep those questions going and we just capture them as we're moving along. So thanks, Andrea. Just going to hand over to you because I can see you've got your slides up. And as I say, if you have any questions, put them in the questions bar.
Wonderful, thanks Helen, appreciate it. Hi everyone, so some of you I might be speaking to for the sixth time now, so I appreciate we've got some people that are tuning in every week, which is fantastic. So just as Helen said, we're going to be talking about the new UK Global Tariff, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about product classification, which I've been stressing over recent weeks, and how the importance of commodity codes is really coming to bear on our intra-EU trade now, or on what will become imports and exports with the EU. So we'll talk a little bit about product classification, and I'll talk about how your commodity codes are structured, and how they're going to change in light of Brexit. So for import, we're going to go down from 10 digits to 8 digits. Then we'll take a look at the new UK Global Tariff, and I'll talk about some of the simplifications that the government have made, which may or may not result in a decrease in duty that you'll pay. We'll talk about the Access to Markets database, which is what's replacing the EU Market Access database that I've referred to in the past. And the Access to Markets database goes live at, maybe live now actually, they'll be decommissioning the other service any day. It's pretty much the same. It allows us to understand the tariffs that will be applicable to our goods going into the EU. And it also duplicates one of gov.uk's systems in terms of highlighting the documentation that'll be required to cover our goods, to clear our goods in the EU, if you like. We'll talk a little bit about the trading landscape from the 1st of January, and how that feeds into our ability to trade under preference. And we're going to look, or we'll mention at least origin protocols, but we're going to cover origin in a little bit more detail next week, I believe. So on to product classification. So we refer to them as commodity codes, we refer to them as tariff codes, but quite often you'll hear them referred to as HS codes, and that stands for the Harmonised System. Okay, so that's a system that was developed, I think, 1988 by the World Customs Organization, the WCO, and over 200 countries worldwide subscribe to that system. What that means is that for the first 6 digits of the commodity code, irrespective of the country where that product originates, those 6 digits should be the same. Okay, so it's a very logical system. I'm just trying to recall how many commodities there are in there. There's something like over 5,000 subheadings, and 21 sections. But we're going to take a look at the UK trade tariff in a bit, and you'll see how that's structured. But it's very simple to follow. Those of you that are used to the UK trade tariff, you'll see that Animal products will be in one section, manufactured goods will be in another section, and so on. So it has a logical order to it. But this won't change. This is how our commodity codes will be structured, at least for the first 6 digits. However, it will change slightly once we stop using the EU Common External Tariff, which is what we've used for decades. So if you look at how the structure is made up, you've got at the export level, you've got 8 digits. Okay, and it's made up of the first 6 digits being of the Harmonised System. So you've got the notion of the HS chapter, HS heading, HS subheading. Then digits 7 and 8 are applied by the EU as part of their Common External Tariff. And then the UK on imports only applies another 2 digits. That's why on your, so if you're trading with the rest of the world, on your import declarations, you will see that the commodity code is 10 digits long, but on your export declarations to the rest of the world, obviously we're not exporting to the EU currently, on your export declarations, your commodity codes will be 8 digits because they refer just to the EU Common External Tariff. So what will happen, the UK government applies those digits 9 and 10 for purely statistical reasons. Okay, they want that extra level of statistics and data on the goods that are coming into the UK. So what happens post-Brexit is we will remove or replace, shall we say, the EU level with the UK level. So our commodity codes should be 8 digits on export and 8 digits on import also. Currently, anybody dealing in cap goods would maybe have seen their commodity codes extend up to 14 digits. But typically, as we're part of the EU, or as we were part of the EU, those commodity codes at export level were 8 digits and at import level 10 digits, but they'll all go to 8 digits. I feel like I've banged on about product classification a lot over the last few weeks, but it is so vital that we get that classification right for our products, because as I've mentioned before, our goods coming into EU goods coming into the UK and UK goods going into the EU will be subjected to that third country levels of scrutiny, where there'll be documentary checks, there'll be physical inspections, there'll be identity checks. So it's essential that the commodity codes that we're listing on our declarations match the goods that we're shipping. And also, as I've mentioned before, everything hangs from the commodity code, from the amount of duty that you pay on import to the amount of duty that your customers pay on export, but also importantly to the kind of documentation that needs to accompany your goods for them to clear at customs. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about before how those commodity codes are structured. So you're looking at, what is the product, what is it made of, what are its essential characteristics, and how does it work? And then how is it presented or packaged to customs? That's an important one, because you might find that, say you trade in, I don't know, pineapple, for argument's sake, you might find that trading in loose pineapple has a different commodity code to trading in packaged pineapple. Don't quote me on that, because I'm not actually familiar with the commodity code for pineapple, but giving you an example. So the packaging and how it's presented has an impact on what that commodity code will be. Okay, but that is usually the criteria that you apply when you're trying to determine the classification of your product. What is it? What's it made of? What are its essential characteristics? How does it work? And how is it packaged or presented? In terms of, we've talked before about how you navigate your way through the UK Global Tariff. So you would typically start by identifying the possible chapters. So the first chapter will be, animals, live animals, and so on, right way through to very much processed products at the end. You compare to what others say. So you can do, because we're all subscribed to the Harmonised System, we can do an open search on Google. Say, for example, you find your commodity code for aluminium ladders, and you decide to do a Google search. Those first 6 digits in every other country that comes up that commodity code should be the same for aluminium ladders if you classified your product correctly. So there's that notion of doing that open search. It's essential, and we'll go in when we look at the tariff in a little bit, because I'm going to show you some of these systems that I've talked about over the recent weeks. We're going to go and have a look at some of them. But it's essential that you read the section and the chapter notes, because they will tell you whether your product is included in that chapter or excluded in that chapter, and if so, where else you need to go to find your product. So the section and chapter notes are really important. And I would say for the purpose of due diligence and protecting yourself against any queries raised during an HMRC audit, that you document your decision. So you clearly document why you've assigned your product with this commodity code. It's just something that you can show should HMRC audit you, and you have a kind of rationale behind your thinking. We've talked before as well about when you want that extra clarification, if you like, somebody to validate your thoughts. So you can use HMRC's tariff classification service, and I know a couple of you contacted me for that email address recently, so it's great that some of you are reaching out. They are running slightly behind at the moment. They typically turn it around within 5 days. I'm still waiting 8 or 9 for clients, but essentially you provide them with as much detail as you possibly can about your product, and what you think your commodity code is. That's the important bit. Don't just ask them, what do you think my commodity code should be? You have to actually go to them and say, this is what I think it should be. And as I said before, they'll come back to you with based on your description of your goods, we think that the commodity code is correct, or we think you should be using this commodity code. It's not legally binding, but obviously it's an email service, so you can print it off, put it in with your commercial records, and it's something that you can present when HMRC audit you and say you've done your due diligence, and you went that extra step to get verification on the code that you're using. When you want that belts and braces approach, you want that legally binding decision, and then we talked before about those binding tariff informations, which is a similar process. You'll provide a lot of detail to HMRC, but they'll also probably request samples of your goods as well, although I know they're not doing that currently with COVID, but typically they'd ask for samples of your goods. Then they'll issue that binding tariff information, and that's legally binding for 3 years and recognised throughout the EU. So the EU has issued something like over 1 million when we last checked in 2018. So it's a service that a lot of companies use. Okay, so there's that informal decision, and then there's that legally binding decision. But why is correct classification so important? So overwhelmingly, it tells us what duties and import VAT are payable on our goods coming into the EU, and similarly, it gives your customers that visibility as well, because as in the absence of a trade deal, we will be paying import duty on EU goods, and similarly, they'll be paying import duty on UK goods as well. So it's essential that we have the correct commodity code so that we're being compliant with our respective customs office, if you like. If you're not using the correct commodity code, you could be overpaying duty, which you really don't want to be doing, but similarly, you could be underpaying duty, and that's a whole different ballgame. There's a very formal procedure to go through to correct that with HMRC, and obviously, the more errors you make of this nature, then you become flagged on HMRC systems. So they conduct their audits very much on a risk basis. So if you're flagged as a trader or an economic operator who is constantly having to correct declarations or correct commodity codes, then you'll be flagged as somebody that they need to maybe pay more attention to. It also allows us to see whether there's any duty easement or any duty relief on our goods. So sometimes you can import goods into the UK, and depending on what their end use is, say they're going into the aviation sector or something, there might be a duty waiver. So you wouldn't know that unless you were using the correct commodity code to classify your goods. It also tells us whether there's any kind of preferential trade agreement in place. So as we look at the UK tariff in a little while, you'll see that because we're still part of the EU, for our imports, it shows that whole preferential list of nations where we have those bilateral trade agreements in place. So you would only know that by using the correct commodity code. If your goods that you're importing are subject to any additional duties like anti-dumping duty, and I can't remember whether I've mentioned this to you before, but anti-dumping duty is a way of kind of leveling the playing field for domestic manufacturers. So a classic example was when China was dumping cheap silk into India. And so it was making it very difficult for local manufacturers to compete with those goods because they were coming in at such reduced rates. You know, they were really, really competitive pricing. So the Indian government applied anti-dumping duty to those goods coming in from India, which leveled the playing field. So it kind of made them as competitive as those domestic market goods were. So your commodity code would tell you whether there was any anti-dumping duties applied to your commodity code on imports. Obviously, we talked a little bit about licensing requirements. So if your goods are classed as dual use goods, so those goods that can be used for both military and civil purposes, or if they're military goods, which will always require a license, but also some works of fine art and other commodities require a license to be able to import them or export them. That detail is included against the commodity code as well. Certification, another one. So we've talked about this additional documentation that we're going to have to provide with our goods, from export health certificates to phytosanitary certificates and so on. Against the commodity code, it will tell you which certification you need to be providing. So that's essential because as moving forward with Brexit, not only is there a certification requirement in terms of physical documentation, your goods might have the requirement to be pre-notified to the importing. You might have to make a pre-notification to say that you're importing a certain type of goods, and then get an authorization to import that good. So there's different process flows depending on commodity codes. And I think going back very, very early on at the beginning of this series, we talked about the new border operating model, and I did urge you all to go away and obtain your copy of that, and that has some fantastic process flows for different commodities showing exactly what happens on an import and an export, so you can see the documentation requirements and the different pre-notification and authorization processes that take place with the declaration for that kind of product. So certification is something else that would be listed against the tariff. Obviously, in addition to anti-dumping duties and standard import duties, we've got the notion of excise duty. So, you know, that would be listed as an additional duty liability against your commodity code. Whether your goods are subject to any quota. So I'm certain I've mentioned quota to you before. I always describe it as kind of our personal allowance on our self-assessment. So we're able to earn a certain amount of money before it becomes subject to tax. And quotas work similarly in so much as governments will decide on a quota for certain products, and it's usually agricultural products that this impacts. So it'll be cereals, dairy, meat, and so on. And at the beginning part of the year, they'll say that they're going to import so much of this product and allow it to be imported at a reduced rate of duty. And then once that quota is exhausted, then importers will be paying import duty at a far higher level. It's typically significantly far higher. So some importers, where possible, will import all of their annual requirement at the beginning part of the year to make sure that it falls within that quota. If your goods have quota attached to them, you'll probably know that already, but it will have quota linked against the commodity code, and you'll have a corresponding kind of reference number that then goes on the import declaration to show customs that your goods are subject to quota, and hopefully that quota hasn't been exhausted. Having the right commodity code, obviously it links with paperwork, and that means that your goods are not held up at customs. I mean, at the best case scenarios, they're held up pending a correction being made and correct documents being issued. But in more serious scenarios, say when they've been shipped without a license or something, then that can lead to the goods being confiscated, which obviously have horrendous costs and implications linked to it. And then penalties. So if you're found to have been underpaying import duty through misdeclaration of goods, then HMRC can demand that you back pay that duty, which they usually go back about 4 to 5 years. But also, if they've uncovered this as you know, through an audit, then they can probably stick a penalty on that as well. So that's in addition to the back payment of duty. So that correct classification of goods is so important. And what I'd also reference, I don't know whether I've mentioned it before, is you can actually change a commodity code from what appears on a commercial invoice. When you're importing goods and your supplier has listed a certain commodity code on their commercial invoice and you're just not quite sure, it's your responsibility, it's your legal responsibility as the importer of record to be compliant in the UK. So you can amend that commodity code. So you can list a different commodity code on your import declaration and reference that. This is why I keep stressing the importance of, even when we're using freight forwarders and customs intermediaries, because we're legally responsible, they're probably operating in a direct capacity for us. That means that they're just carrying out our wishes to the letter. And providing they've done that, they bear minimum to no liability for that misdeclaration of goods. So it's really, really important that we know how we're instructing them and that we understand the commodity codes linked to our goods. So that if there's something that comes through on the commercial invoice and we think that's not right, we're not leaving it up to the freight forwarder to reassign it or just process the declaration as is. We've got the opportunity to correct that. So it's all about compliance in the UK. And similarly, on the other side of things, you don't want to pass problems down to your customers. So from an export perspective, you want to make sure that you're classifying your goods correctly so that they're not having those pain points in their respective countries, because they'll have the same kind of structure linked to penalties and so on with their local customs office as HMRC operate here. Okay, so I hope I stressed the importance of commodity codes. So the new UK, the old trade tariff, sorry, so this is the one that we're familiar with. Those of you that have been importing and exporting outside of Europe will be familiar with how to classify your goods. As I said earlier, it's a very logical format. So you've got live animals and animal products at the top, and it works all the way through the different chapters and different sections until you get to those kind of military goods and works of fine art and so on at the end. Again, it's important to read the chapters and the footnotes, but we'll go in and have a look at that in a little bit. And here, just this screenshot, you can see all of the kind of trade preference agreements that are in place as part of the EU at the moment. But obviously, as we've talked about before, they cease to apply, unfortunately, on the 1st of January. The new UK Global Tariff, this is it, and we'll go and have a look at it in just a second. So this applies to all goods coming into the UK from the 1st of January. So it's based on what we call, you'll have heard referred to as most favoured nation tariffs. So, or the press have, described it in several different ways, but we've talked about how we default to WTO terms. We talked about most favoured nation tariffs. They're both the same. So in the absence of a trade deal with the EU, we absolutely default to World Trade Organization terms, and we refer to our most favoured nation tariff. So this is where the UK sets out a tariff that it agrees to apply to goods coming in from every country across the world in the absence of a trade deal with that particular country. It's not an especially, I'm hoping that this system evolves a little bit, because at the minute it's not particularly user-friendly in terms of navigating your way through, but you do have the search box, which is quite useful. You'll see I referred earlier about the simplification of tariffs. So in some cases, there is a tariff reduction, so it compares the amount of duty being applied to goods coming in from the rest of the world currently under the Common External Tariff, and then it also gives the new tariff. So live horses, that's a tariff that's been simplified. UK government estimates that they've simplified something like over 5,000 commodities. So some commodities that were in at 1.5 or 2% duty, they've just been zero rated. And the government is saying that there's something like 60% of trade will enter the UK from the 1st of January with no tariffs applied to it at all. As you know, as we talked about before, tariffs are a way of government either boosting its national agenda, protecting or boosting its manufacturing sectors, or it can be a way of protecting them, so boosting them or protecting them. So where they don't want, we see it quite a lot with agricultural goods. That's a sector that we protect quite well. So you might see higher tariffs for agricultural goods, and that's to kind of level the playing field and to protect the sector in the UK. But similarly, reducing those tariffs is a way of boosting manufacturing or other things that fall into the government's agenda. So there's certainly a number of products that are linked to the green economy, which have been zero rated within the tariff. So they've looked at it from that perspective as well. So it's basically a case of taking a look and seeing, against your commodity code, are you making any savings? Obviously, as I've said before, it doesn't make up for the fact that we're paying for import duty on those EU goods for the first time, which is a bit painful. Trade with the UK tool, we've mentioned it before, so this is a great tool to share with your suppliers in the EU. Work that we've been doing with clients and fielding questions from them suggests that actually, whilst we feel underprepared, our counterparts in the EU don't feel that much more confident than we do. So you might want to share the Gov UK tool with them, which basically they can put the territory they're exporting from, so they put in France, which obviously comes up as the EU, put in their commodity code. That will list the product specific regulations and any documentation that they're going to need to have accompanied their goods in order for those goods to clear in the UK from the 1st of January. So it's quite a good tool. Access Markets database. So now if you imagine we're turning around, so when we talk about the UK Global Tariff, we're talking about imports really. We're talking about the import liability that we face. But then for the exporters amongst us, we want to understand how the imposing of tariffs in the EU is going to affect our export pricing, how it's going to affect our competitiveness. It's already going to become a little bit more challenging to deal with us because we've got these third country rules and these border controls and checks. So then added to that, in the absence of a trade deal, pricing is going to go up also. Depending on your terms with your customers, you might decide that you want to deliver duty paid to them and you might want to absorb those additional costs, but obviously that has an impact on your margin. And then of course, if you have them collect those additional costs, then that has an impact on theirs and it affects the customer experience. If you're delivering something like delivered at place, where you're getting the goods to France, for example, but then your customer needs to make the import declaration and pay the duty and the import VAT to clear those goods locally, that has an impact on the customer experience as well. So there's some decisions to be made. But the EU Market Access Database is what we've been using in anger for years now to determine that third country duty going into the EU, and it's been pretty much the same as in the UK because we both use the Common External Tariff, but there might be some slight nuances in documentation depending on the local jurisdiction of the member state. But the new system is this nice, whizzy, brightly coloured access to markets database. To be honest, it works on the same principle. I haven't had the opportunity to play around with it. I just haven't had the time so far, but there is a tutorial for you to take a look at there. The principle's the same in terms of our planning. So in the past, I've talked to you about putting in the commodity code of your goods and then selecting the country of origin as China, because currently if you search as a country of origin as the UK, we're still part of the EU, so it will come up as zero tariffs. And then the country of destination, so anywhere within the EU. We're going to touch on it more next week, but it's important to remember that tariffs are based on origin. So it's the origin of a product. And we've talked a little bit about preference and how it becomes a little bit more challenging for us to determine the origin of our goods that would qualify for a preferential trade agreement, but we're going to cover more of that next week anyway. But this is a great database. It's brand spanking new. It's good for determining the duty that's going to be payable on our goods going into the EU, and it's good for determining what documentation accompanies those goods. I prefer this system for the documentation. I can't believe I'm validating a Gov UK system, but it's kind of in the place where I hope the trade with the UK tool ends up being. It's very user friendly. You put in the country that you're exporting to, so say France, picking on France, and your commodity code, and it will come up with the standard list of documentation that you require to clear your goods, but then it comes up with those specific documents. So, are there any manufacturing certificates required? Are there any specific declarations or any other kind of certification? And it gives you that advance notice that you need that in order for your goods to clear in the EU from the 1st of January. Okay. So trading under preference, as I've said before, we're losing so much of our preferential trading landscape. So as part of the EU, we've been party to those 70 odd free trade agreements negotiated across the world. We don't have access to those anymore. So we do default to WTO terms with most of the world. So I suppose when you're thinking about, there's a lot in the press about the free trade agreement with the EU, but what people aren't really drawing much attention to is the impact that Brexit has on our ability to trade with those countries where the EU has already negotiated free trade agreements. So it's not just our trade with the EU, albeit they are a huge part of our global trade. So we default to WTO terms. That means that there are very, very few bilateral trade agreements in place. Obviously, we've got the 22 continuity agreements rolled over with the likes of Israel and so on. We've got the new UK-Japan trade agreement. We've got an agreement in principle from Canada, but it's going to take the government some time to replicate what we have under the EU. Essentially, in terms of importing under preference, we'll still continue to be able to import from those GSP nations, so those generalized system of preference nations. There, if you recall from other sessions where we have agreements with those developing nations to import their goods at a lower rate of duty or a reduced rate of duty to help boost their industrial strategy and their exports. That's a WTO initiative, so that will continue even if there's no EU-UK free trade agreement. So there is still the option for us to import under preference, but obviously it's dramatically reduced as we lose access to all of those free trade agreements as part of the EU. This is where we're at currently. So these are all of the ones that have been agreed so far or signed. These are the continuity agreements or rollover agreements. As I say, we've got a decision in principle or an agreement in principle for Canada and also from Kenya. These are the ones that are currently in discussion. These are the mutual recognition agreements in place. So this is where two parties have decided that they are kind of aligned in terms of regulatory standards, and they recognise each other's regulatory standards and processes for putting products on the market in their respective countries. And then in terms of priorities, so obviously the EU is right up at the top, but then after that, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. This is an interesting one. Everybody wants to be at this party. This is by far and away the largest trading bloc and a very, very exciting development given the huge GDP growth in that region and the levels of disposable income and the emerging middle class. This represents huge potential for UK exporters to capitalise on those demographics, because those nations value British products and services. They recognise them as being quality. So it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly we can ascend to membership of this particular trading bloc. Rules of origin facilitators. So I've talked to you before about how we can sift through the origin protocols of each individual free trade agreement, but this particular system does that for us. So there's something like 400 and above free trade agreements, preferential trade agreements in this system. And it allows us to just basically select where we're exporting from, where we're exporting to, our commodity code, and it will come up with all of the rules of origin that our products need to comply with. We'll look at it a little bit in a second. Country of origin. So we've talked about how Brexit poses a little bit of a challenge with this, whereas before, when we're determining the origin of our goods, we've been able to count EU raw material and EU processing into what we call our accumulation. So our goods have been of EU origin. Moving forward, those, as third country rules apply, those EU raw materials and processing will be classed as non-originating. So we need to kind of go back to the drawing board in terms of determining whether our products meet the specific rules. And of course, we don't know what origin protocols will be contained in any UK-EU trade agreement. But what we have been urging companies to do is to start looking at their bill of materials. So start to understand those core components, those raw materials that make up their goods, and what level of processing and manufacturing they do in the UK, so that they have that kind of calculation that can then be applied to any specific rule that comes out in the free trade agreement. Obviously, where goods are wholly obtained, so as I've mentioned before, those cattle raised in the UK, or those crops harvested in the UK, or minerals mined in the UK, they're wholly obtained. That's simple. It's just when we get into manufactured goods that, you know, we all operate from global supply chains now. That's where rules of origin get a little bit complicated. But there are three core rules that will be applied in any negotiated trade agreement with the EU. And some of them will be product specific. So one rule may say that you can manufacture from certain products or through a specific process rule. So that may it may dictate, depending on the product, the kind of raw materials that you can use, non-originating raw materials that you can use without it affecting your origin. There's also the value added rule. So we've talked about this a little bit before, where your raw materials that are non-originating can't exceed a certain percentage of your ex-works price of your goods without it affecting the origin. And then there's the change in tariff heading rule as well. And again, we don't know how this is going to apply to our goods. That's the crazy thing about this. We've got no clarity at the moment. But the change in tariff is where the sum of its parts, once it's a finished goods, it has an entirely different commodity code. So the example I use is a leather suitcase has an entirely different commodity code in the tariff to its raw materials, be that the leather, the buckle, or the zip. What's quite exciting about in a UK free trade agreement is they may negotiate to have that kind of bilateral accumulation, as we call it, whereby we can operate similarly to how we do now. So we will be able to count that EU raw material and processing as part of our origin, and they'll be able to use UK goods as part of theirs. But this is all up for negotiation. But there is the notion of accumulation, which would be fantastic if we can replicate close to what we've got now. It would make manufacturers' lives a lot easier. We've talked a little bit about when we are claiming preference, the kind of documentation that needs to accompany the goods. So at import, if we're importing from those GSP nations, like I say, there would have to be a declaration on the REC system that we talked about the other week, because we no longer have a physical movement certificate for those goods. But anybody trading at the moment with origin goods, you'll be familiar with the EUR1 and the ATR. They accompany goods and say they're a declaration of origin, basically. So these goods are of this origin, and therefore they comply with this free trade agreement. The EUR1 and the ATR, as I said before, will no longer be applicable to UK origin goods from the 1st of January. So the local chambers are coming up with a UK variation of that, and they'll only be issued where the UK's got a free trade agreement. So obviously we know that's not in a lot of cases. There's also the CE certificate of origin, which is for non-preferential trade. So you can be asked by your customer, or it might be a requirement in the country that you're exporting to. They might require you to provide a certificate of origin, even though there's no free trade agreement in place, and that's called a CE certificate of origin. But obviously that applies to EU goods, so that won't be applicable to the UK from the 1st of January. So again, the chambers are replacing that with the UK variation. Again, where that applies is we see it a lot with the Arab League of Nations, who insist on knowing the origin of all of the goods that they import. But it can be a country requirement, or it might just be your customer, your importer's requirement, because they want to have that origin go through their supply chain so they can do their own bill of materials and so on. Okay, as always, there is a ton of information at the back. I think there's 3 slides just giving you extra information. Some of the stuff that I've referred to today, you can get links for help there. But I am going to go into some of these systems. How are we doing for time, Helen? Just quickly.
Yeah, you're doing okay. It's 2:41.
Oh, okay.
And you've got some questions to answer as well in there, Andrea.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll just have a quick whiz around some of these systems. Let me just come out of this for a second. Okay. Hopefully you can all see this. So this is the UK trade tariff. This is what we've used for the last couple of decades. Some of us are familiar with the old paper-based versions, which were very unwieldy to manage. Fortunately, it's all online now. So you can see we've got the sections and the chapters, and this is how we classify our goods. Okay, so it's very much like a cascading system. Just clicking if it wants to play. Yeah, it's working. So I'm in chapter 2, vegetable products, and you just click on through. until you get to something that looks like your commodity code. So an import, like we say, it's 10 digits. These are the sections that you must read, so the chapters and the section notes. So they will typically tell you if your goods are included in this chapter or this section, or if they're not. That's really important, because if they're not, then that will refer you elsewhere. Okay, if we just click on one of these, then where are we, just so I know? So cut flowers, you've got your overview here, which gives you your commodity code on import of 10 digits and your standard VAT, and then when you're importing outside of the EU, your third country duty rate. Okay, and you'll know on export it's 8 digits. When you go into the actual import tab, it gives you a lot more information, so you can see all of the preferential trade agreements in place and how that equates to a tariff preference of 0. It's really important that you check the conditions against your commodity codes as well. So this one, for the EU-Canada agreement, you'll see that against this commodity code, they're requiring that there's a proof of origin accompany it, or if there's no document provided, then there will be a code to put on the import declaration that denotes that a proof of origin isn't required under that agreement. But they're really important conditions to read. Footnotes, again, are a source of great information. This obviously is where we hope the UK Global Tariff will get to, because obviously all of these preferential agreements that we're party to as part of the EU will cease to apply to us from the 1st of December, 1st of January even. So the 1st of December, that's been and gone. So we're hoping that the UK Global Tariff gets to this level of detail. Because another thing is we don't know at the moment in terms of what quotas are going to apply to certain goods from the 1st of January. So we're dangerously far behind on so much of this stuff, unless it's all going to appear, as we were saying before, 1 minute to 11 o'clock on the 31st. So just coming out of that, this is the new UK Global Tariff. So we took a look at it before. Again, it's very unwieldy to kind of navigate your way through. There's basically, you can go through by page, or the easiest way is just to search for the actual commodity code that you're looking for. Okay, but we can see the simplification against certain commodities. This is the Trade with the UK tool. Again, if I just put, let me think. So if I'm exporting from France, so it comes up to the European Union. Sorry, my system's a little bit slow today. It will get there. Yeah, and then I'll put in my commodity code. I'm not going to search my commodity code, I'm going to find it because that's been bringing up an error recently. So one that I've just been looking into for a client is actually suntan lotion. So where are we? 3304. Sorry, 30 back. Yeah. 330491. Look out. 304. Up. Okay. So here under this, it's telling us at the moment against this suntan lotion, to get it into the UK. At the moment, it's referring us to the UK Global Tariff for the duty, but it's telling us that the VAT is at the standard rate of 20%. Actually, it's giving us this. This is new, so they are actually giving us the tariff now, and that can be imported at a 0 rate. Okay, and then any product-specific regulations would be listed here. So there's certain import and marketing requirements for placing cosmetic goods on the UK market, so they would be in there. So it's a great tool from a documentation perspective, and now especially as they've added the tariffs as well. Previously it's just been the VAT that they've been referencing there. So this is good to share with any suppliers that you've got in the UK, in the EU, sorry, so that they're clear. If they're delivering duty paid to you in the UK, they're clear that if they're collecting the duty, what that duty is going to be, and similarly what documentation or any kind of registration they're going to have to do on those products before they ship them. The access to market database. So this is what we're talking about for goods going into the EU. If I was to put, which I have there already, 3304, let's go 9110, and as I said, select a country of origin that doesn't have an agreement. So China doesn't have a bilateral agreement with the UK, or with the EU, sorry. And then let's just select France. So hopefully that comes up with, so product successfully identified. Yes, here we go. It's just a little bit slow loading. So we can see here that similarly on import into the EU from a third country, there's no tariff applied. But it will also give you here import requirements, so they will be general. So they'll tell you that actually to get those goods into France, you need your commercial invoice, your customs value declaration, all these things that we've talked about before. But then specific to those particular products, again, there's considerations around the import and marketing of those goods in France. So it will list exactly what you need to do. This is for those goods going the other way, so your exports. And then another one I wanted to share with you. This is the one that I particularly like. So again, for goods, I just think it's better than the access to market database. And these systems are a little bit temperamental. Doesn't want to come. Ah, there we go. 33049100. Continue, and again, it's thrown that error. This is not me, folks. This is actually the tool's not working properly. But then go back. So we're going back into that lotion that I've talked about, or the tanning lotion and other. And this tool actually tells you that some of them kind of replicate what each other are doing. So this will tell you how to get the goods out of the UK and then how to importantly get them into France. So you've got all of these requirements in terms of freight documentation. You've got your entry summary declaration, which we talked around safety and security, and then your core export declaration and the import declaration that your customer will make in France. But then you've got specific requirements here. So you've got a cosmetics product notification that has to be done before you can place those goods on the EU marketplace. You've got certificate of goods manufacturing, which is something you as the exporter would create, but your customer in the EU would have to have a copy of. And there may be a chemical safety report depending on the actual nature of the goods. There actually is for this commodity code for suntan lotion. But similarly here, it talks about a site certificate, but you'll see there's a slight variation in the commodity code, so it wouldn't be applicable for the one that we're searching for. So there's a code that goes on the import declaration that says that a site certificate isn't a requirement. And then finally, the last one that I keep going on about is the rules of origin. So if we were to search, we're exporting from the United Kingdom, and we're going into Canada, and we put our commodity code in, so 33049100. That's the product there, and it should in a second bring up, it tells us if it was the right, it's just slow, it's just catching up. What this system will do is it will tell us if there's a preferential trade agreement in place, so it's in force, and obviously we know there's an EU-Canada trade agreement in place. While we're part of the EU, we get to take advantage of that. So if goods would be subject to a 6.5 rate of duty under the most favoured nation tariff, but obviously as part of the EU, we're party to this EU Canada free trade agreement. And similarly, we've got that agreement in principle for the turn of the year. So that tells us the rules of origin. So it talks about those change of classification heading and the amount of non-originating raw material and the percentage threshold that can't go over the ex-works price. It's so much more user-friendly than navigating the origin protocols in the actual agreement. And then it will tell you things that don't apply. So sometimes in here you might see that an exporter, they won't just accept an exporter's declaration of origin, which we've talked about before with the approved exporter status. They actually require a hard copy of the origin certificate, which it may actually say in here. Yeah, so they won't accept approved exporter declarations. They want the actual certificate of origin, and the period of validity for any certificate of origin will be 12 months. Okay, so it's a brilliant system, but we're not going to be using it in anger really come the first of the year because we lose access to so much of that origin. So folks, that is another whistle stop tour. Let me just go into
got about 5 questions in there, Andrea.
Brilliant. Okay, if we have goods come over from the EU for processing, where before we return them, currently covered under Article 50 temporary admission, how will that change? There is still a notion of temporary admission. It's what we call a custom simplified procedure. But if you are bringing those goods over to the UK for processing and then they're being re-exported, you might be better using something called inward processing, which completely suspends the import duty and the import VAT on those goods while they're in that procedure. And then providing they've been exported, re-exported, then that duty and VAT never becomes payable. Similarly, if they're then processed in the UK and then released into free circulation in the UK, then that import duty and import VAT becomes payable on the finished goods. So inward processing might work better for you than temporary admission unless there's a particular reason that you went for temporary admission. Legally binding decisions, is this recommended for all types of goods? Not necessarily. It's quite often it's easy to determine the origin of your goods once you know the process that you go through. And like I say, there's that open search that other exporters and importers are classifying the goods in the same way. It's only where classification is really tricky. The other thing that I didn't mention to you is to subscribe to the tariff updates from HMRC as well, because it's an organic document. They're releasing tariffs all the time. There might be a tariff code that comes out that better describes your goods to the one that you're using. So I don't think legally binding is necessary. It depends how risk averse you are. You could apply, but some companies are operating lots and lots of different commodity codes. It would be impractical to get binding tariff information for all of them. You mentioned that agricultural products will have a tariff on import if product is being used in either manufacture of a where's it gone? Oh, yeah. If product is being used in either the manufacture of a further product mixture, is there relief? If so, how does this one apply? So again, this would be inward processing would be perfect for that, whereby you can bring those agricultural products in, suspend the duty, suspend the import VAT while those products are processed. If they're re-exported, that duty and VAT never becomes payable. If they're then released into the UK for free circulation, then you do pay the import duty and VAT, but on the finished goods. You can apply, there's 2 different types of application. You can have full authorization, which means that you can bring unlimited number of consignments of those goods into the UK, into that process in a year, and you have 12 months to process them before discharging them. We call it a discharge from that procedure. Or if it's less frequent than that, then you can have what's called authorization by declaration, which is limited to 3 times per year that you can bring those goods in. But you want to look for inward processing. If you just want to drop me a line after the session, I'll forward you the link. That's not a problem. Can EU origins still be declared as a generic group instead of listing individual country? I'm not sure what you mean by that, John. Sorry, I'm just reading it again. Can EU origin be declared as a generic group instead of listing individual country? I don't know whether you're talking about the bill of materials there that comes to the end origin of the goods as being of EU origin. Again, if you want to drop me a quick email, I'll just while we're on, I'll share my slides again with that final with my contact details on that final slide, then I'll get to grips with kind of what you're asking. How do we apply a tariff code to goods sent to EU country for repair or calibration? That would be outward processing. So I've talked to you about inward processing. Outward processing is where you export goods for that purpose. And so you send goods over to the EU for that purpose, and then you bring them back in, and provided they're brought back in under outward processing, then you don't pay the import duty or the import VAT when they come back in. So that's outward processing as opposed to inward processing, sorry. Are there any more questions? Anyone? I can't believe, Sam, we've actually finished with 2 minutes to spare. This never happens. We usually go over.
Just checking there's no more questions from anybody for Andrea. So Andrea, I just want to say thank you. That's a really informative session. As we mentioned earlier, this is a series of webinars that Andrea is delivering on our behalf. So please take a look at the other sessions. You've obviously got Andrea's contact details there. And just a reminder really that as well as the EU transition support, you know, each of your growth hubs will be offering a series of different activities and different supports and different grant schemes. So please do get in touch with your relevant growth hub. If you're not sure how to get in touch, then by all means come back through the emails that we're using as part of these series of webinars, and we can direct you to the appropriate growth hub, because there's a lot of work going on, really some really good stuff at the moment. So thanks, Andrea.
No, you're welcome. Thank you again, everyone. And we'll see you next week. I think next week is the last one before Christmas. So we'll see you next Wednesday, I think it is. But thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.